Hi, I'm Steven, and what am I doing? Today I'm going to put in a fixed curved shower rod to provide a little more shoulder and elbow room in the shower. Let's take a look. All right, let's take a minute and talk about measuring, which is something you should do before you actually order. It's important to know the width for the shower rod that you're trying to put in. Now, as you see, this bathroom currently has a tension bath rod, which just means it has a spring within this rod, and you kind of screw it back until it has enough tension to stay up. In our case, we're going to put up a fixed rod, and when you're ordering a fixed rod, it's definitely important to know your actual width. Now, your first inclination may be to measure across the bathtub just because it's easier. You think, oh, I'll just lay my tape across there and measure to get my distance. But the problem with most houses is that they aren't always perfectly square. So the measurement you get down here may be slightly larger, or more importantly, slightly smaller than what you would get if you actually measured where the rod is supposed to go. Now, one other thing that I'll mention about when you're ordering your rod is once you know your width across the top where the rod's going to go, that's going to help you in ordering because you want to check the width. Now, if you have a single piece rod, such as I ordered, it won't extend. You can't make it any longer than it actually is, so that will be the extent. But you can often, you'll read the instructions, you can find that you can cut them down by an inch, maybe as much as 2 if you cut an inch from either end. But it's best to get one that fits your opening. An alternative to that is to actually get a two-piece rod. Even in the curved rods, they make them in a two-piece, where one slides inside the other one, which means that you will have a little bit of a seam out here. But just as in this tension rod, which has a seam in it, it's not really that noticeable. The value of the two-piece rod is that they often go much larger. So if you have a shower, a standard tub is like 60 inches wide. If you have a larger shower area that you're trying to, or a larger tub, you can often get those up in the 70-inch range. And the value of the two-piece one is that they often will go much smaller too. I think I've seen them as low as 48 inches. So it's important to know when the size of the opening that you're trying to fit is also going to help determine what kind of rod you need to order. So you're either going to get a single piece rod that's close to the size you need, or you're going to get a two-piece that will expand or contract to fit the area that you want. I was able to get my shower bar in a single bar rather than a two-piece, so I chose to do that. It came in standard plastic packaging, and the hardware is in an associated box. Let's take a look. Here we see what was in the hardware box. The all-important instructions. We'll take a closer look at those in a minute. These are the cover plates for the finish on the outside. These are the brackets that will attach to the wall that the curved bar will go into. And these are hollow anchor screws. So if you're going into a hollow wall, these are correct. If you have a slightly different material, you might need a different set of mollies. But we'll decide on whether to use what they provided or something else when we get a little deeper into the project. Now that we've unpacked the box and we found the instructions, let's take a quick look at those. If you're familiar with my videos, I always suggest that you look at the instructions before you begin. It often will help you be ready for the unknown. And generally, I have to assume the manufacturer has done their job in order to make sure that you have all the components that you need. But it's good to double check. So in this case, we see it begins by telling you the items you're going to need in order to put this together. And so we see that they expect you to have a drill, a level, a tape measure, also a screwdriver that's appropriate for your screws. So in this case, it's suggesting a Phillips. A pair of scissors in case there's something that needs to be cut, like the packaging, and of course safety goggles. Now, if we go further and we look at what they've included here, this is the first important thing to note, which is good to read the instructions. Now, remember, we unboxed it, and I'll start over here. These are the decorative plates. They look like this. So these will go over the rod goes through, and these cover up the screws. These are the actual brackets, and so this will be mounted such that the curved rod comes out and around. And then we see they gave you these anchors. Now, I know these anchors are for drywall, hollow drywall. And the way they work is when you drill a hole large enough for this to fit into, I think it's just a 1/4 inch hole, this you kind of tap into the wall. When you screw the screw down, this compresses and causes this interior areas to expand out and grab the wall from behind. So this little plate is holding the outside, covering the hole, and this is squeezing the back of the drywall to stay in place. Then you can take the screw out once it's squeezed down in place, and then mount your brackets using this. However, it points out that if you're going to be screwing directly into studs or a tile application, then you're going to have to get your own anchors because they're not included here. And so one of the things you need to note is the height of your rod is going to determine, is your current rod against drywall, in which case these anchors will work just fine for you. But if your current wall is tile, then you're probably going to need to go and buy some number 8 anchors, these with the screws, in order to drill your hole. In addition, you're going to need a masonry bit that is the proper size for drilling these holes through your tile in order to do the mounting. Now, in my application, I am going through tile. So I've already gone and collected my mollies and screws and the masonry bit that I'll use for that. But let's look further at the instructions. Okay. Now, the number 1 and number 2 here is pretty much recapping what I just said before, which is measure. Always measure. And in their drawing, they also point out that you measure at the top, not at the bottom area. And if it's square, they're going to be the same, but whether it's square or not is not as important as making sure this measurement is the one you take at the top. And then they give you a convenient little place to write it down. If you're using a fixed rod and you need to cut it shorter, remember a fixed rod can't go any longer, but it can be cut shorter. They show you that you would measure out the distance that you need to cut off and use a hacksaw in order to cut through the metal in order to do that. Now, hopefully you're not cutting off a long piece. It's just going to be something short, an inch or less. But if you've ordered it the right length, or close to the right length, then you won't have to do much cutting. Next, let's take a look at how they tell you it's going to mount. So they want you to hold this up in the position that you have. And if you notice, I'll put one here, it has a bunch of holes in it. They don't expect you to put a molly in all of those holes. So they suggest 3 screws per item. So they show you with 2 at the top and 1 at the bottom. And that will fix it firm enough against the wall where it won't move. Now, why did they put so many holes in it? Well, there's a couple of reasons why, but the one thing that you can take from this, though, is that if for some reason you start off and you get one hole in the wrong place, you have another opportunity to get another screw in. So you want to make sure you get at least 3 screws to try to hold that firmly into place. They point out that you're going to mark with a pencil, you're going to drill. In the case that you're going through drywall, a regular drill bit will do it. If you're going through tile, you're going to need a masonry bit. Then we get down to the anchors again. Again, it points out that if you're going through drywall, you're going to use their squeeze anchors that they gave you here. If you're not, and you're going directly into a wood stud or into tile, it tells you the tile anchors are not included, and you'll need to get the mollies, just as I did. Now we'll go through these as we do the install too, but let's take a quick look here. So they're showing you that they want you to prep the one side before you've actually put the anchors in the wall. And so I'm going to tell you that isn't necessary, that if you squeeze these down, you can take them out and then you could put this on. But if you're following their instructions, they tell you to go ahead and prep it with the bracket with the screws on it. Now it's important to note which way the anchor is pointing, or the bracket. So in this, you're looking at it this way, you think, oh, this is the way I want the anchor to be, but they show you that it's actually this way. You see how it's kind of curved in? So it's important to get it right, because the curved rod comes off the wall and curves around then to the other side. So you're going to want to do a couple of looks at this to make sure that you're getting it on the right way. So depending on the side that you're doing, you're going to turn this one way or the other in order to make sure that they're pointing the right way in order to put on your angled wall. Next, they point out that you need to put the cover plates on the rod before you attach it, which is very important. Remember, these cover up your screw holes. So if they're not already on the rod, you won't have an opportunity to put it on the rod after the fact. So you take these and you slide them onto the rod back to back like this. So if you slide it on the rod, then one will go one direction, one will go the other direction, and you'll end up with the finished side out. Next, it points out that on the bracket that you first attach to the wall, you see that it's pointing out. They tell you to push the rod onto that bracket. They have the other bracket pushed into the rod here already. Then they lift the rod up into place so that the bracket reaches the right position to put the screws in. So that means you've already drilled the holes on this side and have already put in your anchors. Should go up here. So this means that you're lining these up with the holes you've already pre-drilled and the anchors that you've already installed. And so then you screw this side down and your rod is fixed. Then you push the decorative cover plates out and they will snap. You probably will hear it. They will snap into place over the bracket and it will be ready. So that is the final instructions. Now, a couple of things you'll note is that they never showed you in the instructions where you're actually applying a level. That is a good question, because if you measured correctly and you have your brackets in the right place, your rod should come out level to start with. If it's out of level, then you don't have much option other than to move one of the brackets, which would mean if you've already pre-drilled holes and put them into place, that you're going to have to move those. So I'm going to suggest that you take great care at the beginning and get the measurement for the bracket correct, and this will become moot because you won't need to check the level. We'll talk about that more when we get to that step. So now I think we're ready to look at installation. Next thing to pay attention to, especially when it comes time for installation, is the height. Now, a standard shower curtain for this application, as I understand it, is somewhere between 70 and 72 inches. But you don't actually put the curtain all the way down to the bottom of the tub, otherwise it you might stand on it or something. So it's generally up a couple of inches. And if you're using an application that has an exterior curtain as well, a decorative curtain, then it hangs on the outside. So you definitely want to figure out what height you want your decorative curtain to be from the floor. And normally, if you're going to do that, I'm assuming you have your decorative curtain closed. So it's important to note that you're going to be at least 72 inches. And given that you don't want your shower curtain to go all the way down and touch the bottom of the tub, you're more than likely going to want to be somewhere between 74, 76 inches in height. So if you have an existing rod and you like the height that it has, you can go ahead and mark the position of the rod that you currently have and use that as the position where you want the new rod to go. Now, before I remove my existing rod, as I suggested before, I went ahead and marked where the rod was. So you can see my mark here. I have the same mark on the other side. But what's going to be important is determining where this bracket goes, is to make sure that it's level on both sides. And remember how I said using a level on it after the fact is probably not that helpful, because it means you're going to have to move screws and things. So what's more important is to make sure you get it in the right place to start with. Now, you could measure from the floor up to the bracket, but that's a long way to handle, especially if you're working by yourself with a measuring tape. And you're actually closer to the ceiling. And because of the way that your eye works when you're looking at items, you're going to compare it to the ceiling more than you're going to compare it to the floor. So when you walk in the room, if it's out of level, it's going to be because you can tell there's a difference between the height on one side and the other while looking at the ceiling. So the best plan is to measure from the ceiling to determine where you're going to place it. So if I want the rod to be approximately where it was before, I can compare this to the rod that I have, and I can see that I'm going to be slightly above where it was. So if I take this hold it in position, and make a mark. Then that is what I want to measure. So if I measure for that mark, I see I'm at 14.5 inches. No, 13.5, sorry. 13.5 inches. So if I do the same measurement on the other side, 13.5 inches down from the ceiling, it's going to look balanced with the ceiling. So even if it's slightly out of level, when you walk in the room, you won't notice it as much because you're looking at it from the ceiling height. But my guess is, in most houses, your ceiling is at the same level because of the way the ceiling rafters and the studs join up. So I'm going to suggest you measure down to your line on the one side, and then you measure the other side and make your line at the same position. Now, I want to point out one more thing before you go to install that you probably need to think about, especially if you want to have a decorative curtain on the outside of your rod. And that curtain always hangs outside the tub. The shower curtain that's inside the tub is no problem because the bottom of it is going to be inside the tub. So the curvature that's bringing the shower curtain out is giving you more elbow room at the top where you want it, and the water is flowing into the tub. But if you have a decorative curtain outside that hangs out here, it's important to note how the distance that you have to the toilet. Because if your decorative rod is going to be closed all the time when you're not using it, let's lay it into place here. Note what's happening. The further out I take this rod, the closer I get to the toilet. And so if a curtain is hanging next to you this far out, it may seem uncomfortable to use the toilet. So it'll be important to determine if you're going to use a decorative rod, how close you want this to be for comfort, which may mean that you have to draw it back a little bit further. But even if you drew it back this far, note the distance from here to inside the tub. In this case, I mean, I'm still gaining 7-8 inches of extra room in my shoulder and elbow area, which is going to make the tub more comfortable to use with the shower closed. But the further out you can come, then of course, the more room you're going to have at the top, but your shower curtain is going to then curve this way, which is important to note again on the height. If you put it up too high, such that your shower curtain wants to blow out, then that wouldn't be good. So you want to consider all these things when determining your placement. As I mentioned before, this mark is at 13.5 inches from the ceiling. That's going to be my top position here for my rod. And I'm also going to measure from the outside over to make sure, and make a couple of marks to make sure that I don't have this twisted in some odd way. So I want this to be square to the wall, and then I'll use that measurement from the ceiling down and this measurement on the other side as well, since the two sides are uniform, in order to figure out where to make my drill holes. So holding this approximately in position, if I measure from here out, I can see I'm at 3.5 inches. Okay, 3.5 inches. So holding this position, I want to mark where my holes are. I want to hold there, I want to hold there, and I want to hold there. So, difficult to see on my tiles, but here's one, and here's one. So that's where I want them to be. Now, first thing, even though we marked all the holes, I like to do one, place the bracket again with a screw, and then use that to get the other positions. That way I know that the other holes are in an accurate location. Sometimes when you're holding and things are wiggling around, things can move. To get started, a quick word about safety. Number one, as the instructions indicated, good to wear safety glasses when you're drilling, especially into a hard material like tile. If you have a more traditional shower tub enclosure, your wall may actually end around the 6-foot mark anyway, and you may be drilling directly into drywall. Remember, if you're going into drywall, they gave you the squeeze mollies to use for that. But in my case, my tile goes all the way to the ceiling. I'm going to be drilling into the tile. The second safety thing I want to point out is that when you're drilling above your head this way, it's good to actually get yourself to the height so that you can handle the tool without having to reach way over your head. But to do that in the bathroom, we obviously have a narrow space. I'm going to suggest that you use a step stool, put it inside your tub, and use that. Don't try to do something awkward like stand on your toilet and the edge of your tub, because the edge of your tub is, mine is a little wider. A standard one is only like 3 or 4 inches wide. That makes, you don't need to do a balancing act while you're trying to do the install. So use a step stool inside the tub so that you can reach more comfortably where you want to be. Now, when you're going to drill into tile and you have a masonry bit, it has a flattish end on it. You can't use a regular drill bit. This drills through the masonry this way. But see, this is a very slick tile, so if you look, I mean, it's very easy for this to move around. And because of that, it can be hard to get it started in the right position at times. So what I would suggest is you take a nail punch like this with a pointy tip on it, or even an actual nail. If you have a large nail, hold it at the position you want, and then just give it a quick tap or two. You're not trying to break the tile. All you're trying to do is to break the surface glaze. See how this is now? You hear? I've broken the surface glaze there. So now when I put my drill bit up to that, it'll catch on this position that I've tapped out. See how the bit moves easily out here, but when I get it to the position where I did my dimple, now it's stuck. So this will assure me that my hole will be where I want it to be. So when we start, you'll see I went through, I didn't hit a stud. If I had hit a stud at this point, then I would still use the hole, but instead of putting a molly in it, because the molly would probably be impacted by the stud behind it, I would just use a longer wood screw and make sure I screwed into that stud. But in this case, I didn't hit a stud. So I'm gonna take one of my mollies, I'm gonna test fit it in the hole. Now, if I start to put it in and my molly is too loose, I'm gonna wanna go down in size on my drill bit. If I can't get it in and I can't tap it in easily, then I might need to go up an increment in my drill bit. Put the bracket up onto this position. I'll put this one screw in. That's the only hole I've made so far. And in doing that, I can now make sure that my other holes line up where I want them to be. Oop, that's not good. I think my molly actually pushed through. Yeah, so my hole is actually a little too large. So, not to worry, I can go down in size on my next hole, but to fix this one, I'll just put in a larger molly. I happen to have one handy here. Remember how we pointed out that the bracket has multiple holes in it? So if you do drill a hole that's the wrong size and you don't have a molly that will use this particular hole the right way, don't worry. All you need to do is place this back up and then use one of the other holes in order to try to get 3 holes in it. You can fill this hole with some caulk and you'll be good to go. There shouldn't be moisture this high on your wall unless you're really aggressive at taking a shower. But you could fill that with caulk and then try again at the other position. In my case, I do have another molly handy. I'm going to drive this one in, and we will use this one for the first hole, and then I will use a smaller drill bit on my subsequent holes. Let's go ahead and put this in. I didn't intentionally make that error, but it's good sometimes to point out that we're all human and to point out that there are ways to correct your mistakes if you make them. Okay, I don't want to go super tight. I want to be able to move this. I will use my tape, as I said before. I'll measure from the top so I can see my 3.5 inches. If I look at the bottom, it needs to come in, whoops, just a little bit, a little too much. Something like right there. So I believe we'll be right on. So now I will take my pencil, make my additional marks. I want one here and one here, which is what they recommended. But as I said, if you did make a mistake, you can use one of these other holes to get your additional one in. So, while it's in position, if your nail or your punch will actually still reach the tile while it's in that position, you can go ahead and do your taps for those as well. And then you know that you're in the position that you want. I was using, a 5/16. I thought I was using a quarter. So that's what I need is a quarter. Now I remove this one that I put up temporarily. I get it out of the way. And I drill my next 2 holes. Again, notice my punch is already successfully made a place for it. There we go. My original mollies. And now I'll tap these into place. Much better fit. And we're ready to put on the first bracket. We hold it up in position, get the first screw started. Now before you tighten this one all the way down, remember there can be a little bit of variation in where things start. So what I suggest is while it's still a little bit loose, go ahead and get your other screws started in their position. And that way, if there's any torque or tension that might twist it just a little bit, you already have your screws started. We screw that one down. that one down. And there's the final one. So now that's nice and firm, just the way you want it. You'll notice that I chose the bracket that is tilting the pipe out, and that's because the curvature comes in this way and goes out into the room and then back again. So now what I'll do is I'll measure and put my bracket on the opposite side so that it lines up the same. And before I do that, I'll just go ahead and verify my measurements. So we still see we're at 13.5. We see we're at 3.5. I'll do that on the opposite side. So we'll get our 13.5 first. So that's right here. We'll get our 3.5, which is right here. We'll make a second 3.5 mark down here. We'll hold it up like this. We'll see we have it in our position, and I'll mark my first hole. I'm gonna take my punch. I'm just trying to score the glaze tile a little bit. I'm not hitting it so hard to break the tile. All I'm trying to do is get a little dimple in the glaze. Should go in with no problem. And you'll notice that where my original circle was farther out, but that was the way it was in here. So my tension rod obviously wasn't balanced front to back the way I want this to be. So there you have it. Always good to double check. Let's check our height. 13.5, actually 3.5. 3.5, that looks pretty good to me. One here, and one here. Again, I'm not hitting it so hard to break the tile. I don't want to crack the tile. I just want to break the glaze, so to speak, so that when I use my masonry bit, I'll get my next two holes in the position that I want. Tap in our mollies. We'll look back at the instructions, but remember, we don't want to go ahead and mount this one. What we want to do is now get to the rod. So the one bracket is already in position. So now what we want to do is take the end caps, place those end to end of each other, and slide them onto the rod. Remember, the inside plate is what covers up the brackets, so we want to hold them end to end like this, and then slide them onto the rod. Okay, so that way, when we're done and we push these out to the edge, the good side, the side we want to see, is facing out. Now I'll also point out, you'll notice a little dimple on one side, but not on the other. So based on these brackets, this is what the dimple will hit. So when you're going to try to snap this down, you want to make sure you turn this so that it faces the bracket the right way and snaps into place. It tells you with our fixed bracket on the wall, we're going to put the rod onto that one, but we stick the bracket into the end of the pipe on this one, so that when we lift it up into the position, we'll be able to then screw in the screws and then slide the cover plate into place. So that end is the end that I've affixed to the wall. So I'll take my bracket and I'll actually put it into this end of the hose. I mean the rod, the hose. So you see, if you notice, the end of the rod has a slight taper to it. It's not cut square. That's because when this is against the wall, obviously the long end is going to fit over here like that. There's my fixed rod over there. This is at this one end. I have the bracket in place inside the rod already. And I'm going to put this over the rod. Now you'll notice that in the drawing, sorry for that sound, in the drawing they show you how the rod is facing down. This is because if you try to put it in already tilted out, remember this is made to fit the space that we have here. So you don't have enough room to go over the end of the rod and go straight in. So by putting it on in this downward position first, you can now swing this position up and it will go into position. So we'll swing this up. Okay, now we just need to move it over to be on top of our mollies, and we'll be able to put in our screws. I will put the bottom one in first. Just like before, I like to get them all started first in case I need a little adjustment, but it looks like they're all going to be dead on where they need to be. And there we go. Our rod is in position, and now we have these plates. We just need to put those into position. Remember how I pointed out there's a dimple on one side and there's not on the other? So the dimples go up and down to fit around the plate here. So if we take this forward with the dimples up and down, we should be able to snap it into place, just like that. And now here's the dimple. We want the flat side. So we get it into position. And we snap it in, and there we go. Wipe off our fingerprints, and we're ready to put the shower curtain on. Looks great. You see it bends out a little further than the tub, which gives you more shoulder room and elbow room when you're taking a shower. It feels much less claustrophobic. And you're not bumping into the shower curtain as much. But it works just like the other one. But not being a tension rod, you also don't have to worry so much about if you pull on that the wrong way that it's going to fall down. You'll tear the curtain before you would tear the rod down at this point. I hope you found that helpful. I'm Steven. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to see what Steven's doing. Thanks.